Hello and welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we will be interviewing Rite Worshipful Brother Cameron Bailey, Deputy Grand Master of Washington.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast. I'm Matthew Appel. I'm a Mason here in Washington, along with Very Worshipful Brother David Colbeth. And we also have our two other usual hosts here from the Great White North. We have Right Worshipful Brother Trevor McKeown and Worshipful Brother Stephen Chung from the Grand Lodge of British Columbia and Yukon. And we have our special guest who's been here enough times that we should probably just make him a host and be done with it. But we have Right Worshipful Brother Cameron Bailey, who is the Deputy Grand Master of Washington and will be standing for election for Grand Master here in about a week.
Yep.
So thank you for coming back onto the show, sir.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So we had the opportunity, for which we were grateful to have talked to you a couple weeks ago about sort of the year you were thinking about to come. And I know that having attended your planning session for the Grand Lodge team for next year, you had some very sort of specific ideas of what things you would like to see get rolling should you be elected to the Grand East. And use our cover there. Should you be elected to the Grand East, what sort of programs you'd like to see for some of the committees and also for the lodges as far as education and that sort of thing. And I just sort of wanted to hear a little bit more about that and what sort of things you were planning, sir.
Yeah, certainly. I think the most important thing we have to do is we have to restart after the pandemic strong. And the best way we can do that, we've got to make sure that we've got a good lodge experience so that men get back into the habit of coming to lodge, right? Because we can't just assume they're gonna return. And in order to do that, we're gonna have to give them compelling reasons to attend. And that means we're gonna have to up our game on our meals. We're gonna have to probably up our game on our ritual work in a lot of lodges. But most importantly, to my mind, is we're gonna have to provide meaningful Masonic education. You know, no man wants to go to a lodge, sit there and pay the bills for an hour and a half, come home and never have any opportunity to learn anything or for real fellowship. And really, no wife wants to have her husband come home from a lodge meeting and say, well, what did you do tonight? And he's got nothing to talk about, you know? So we want to make sure that he's got a compelling reason to attend and that it's interesting enough so that when he goes home and his wife says, well, what did you do tonight? He can say, well, we talked about this and it was kind of interesting. But unfortunately, in so many of our lodges, we completely neglect that Masonic education, that educational component, right? A lot of lodges don't do it at all. A lot of other lodges handle all the business and everything else at the start of the meeting. And by the time they finally get around to it as the very last piece of the meeting, right, everybody's ready to go home. Well, I think we're a lot better off. We put the interesting stuff right at the start of the meeting and then push all the business to the end. And maybe we won't have to argue for an hour about, you know, whether or not we should switch to LED light bulbs. And so I really want to stress that education. Related to that, you asked about our committees. So I think education's fairly easy to provide, right? We can just go through our lectures and we can pick out a little bit of it and we can discuss those parts that we pick out round robin style with the brothers in the lodge and see what they mean to people. But I do understand that a lot of people worry about providing education and what they're going to provide. We're going to ask our research and education committee to come up with topics, come up with some background information so that the master can just introduce the topic, provide the background information, and get the discussion started. And I know that the committee is already working on that, and we'll have that ready to go right after the installation. At least, a few topics to get it started. That'll grow over time. The other thing that I think there's a danger that we face, in that we have this huge backlog of degrees that have built up over the last 15 months. We have lodges I know that are chomping at the bit to do degrees, because I hear from those lodges every day. But we've also seen how badly we've all forgotten our ritual over the last 15 months. And I'm really concerned about a lodge conferring degrees when it can't even open and close itself properly. And so I really hope, and I met with all of my district deputies again today, to get them to really encourage the lodges to slow down on this a little bit. Let's practice. Let's make sure we can actually confer the degree before we confer the degree. Otherwise, we've got no hope of retaining these men, right? If we bring them in and we can't perform that degree and we can't close the lodge after it, we just have no hope. So that's my main focus starting out the year, is education in the lodges and relearning the ritual, right? And I think we all have to do that. I've seen a lot of ritual the last month or so, and trust me, we've all got to relearn our ritual. So that's my focus getting started.
It does seem that a lot of times, for perfectly valid reasons, grandmasters come in and they want to do the laundry list of 18 things, and having a focus, I think, will help a lot. And I understand both impulses, but yeah, it's definitely I don't know, hazard's quite the word, but easy to get diluted and in something like that.
Yeah, and I did have a laundry list prior to COVID, of things that I thought that I wanted to accomplish, but the longer COVID went on, the smaller the list of things that I wanted to do became, because I really think, if coming out of it, I think we have a tremendous opportunity, because I think we've broken bad habits that crept in through past decades just by not doing them. But on the other hand, if we don't do the fundamentals, if we don't hit it right, we're going to stumble. And so I think we've got to focus all our energies and all our efforts on those fundamentals to make sure that we can bring them back.
Question for you. You were talking about conferring degrees, of course, and you've got a lot of candidates in waiting. Does Washington, in your Constitution, have or code, I think you call it, have a limit on the number of candidates for a conferral?
Yes. I believe the limit is 3.
Okay, good. All right. We have a limit of 5 in our jurisdiction, and I think that's impossible, but that's the limit. But my sponsor 40 years ago would constantly talk about how during and after the war, they would confer degrees on a dozen or more at a time. And I'm just wondering if you're going to get some push from lodges saying, we've got them all here, let us just put them through.
So I have received that push, only from one lodge, but we'll be able to resist that. This is just my personal opinion, and maybe I'm off base, right? But when I got my entered apprentice degree, it was myself and one other fellow. And one of us knelt at the proper place at the altar. The other one was off to the side. One of us had his hands on the lodge's Bible. One of us had some Bible they found in the back room. One of us was led by the senior deacon. the other was led by someone else. And I think it detracts from the experience. And to be honest with you, I understand why between the wars and before the wars, that work needed to be done more wholesale. But the Washington jurisdiction is not initiating that many new men every year that we can't make a degree night special for a single man. I think it's nothing but laziness on our own parts for not making that night a special night for one single man. Because how many degrees does any lodge perform in a year? It's a small handful, and we can do that correctly, I think.
And we actually just had this conversation amongst the principal officers of our lodge, because we have 9 in waiting, and it was like, well, how many do we want to do? And you're right, it does come down to, it's about the experience. And so we figure we may end up just booking 3 nights in a row or something like that, to get the 3 groups through of 3, and max it out at 3, because we've done 4, and it makes for a really long night. And it's a shared focus, but I think the length of the night really detracts from the event itself, right? So I agree on that focus. I think that's a great idea.
And Steve, you're describing it being a long night? I assume that you're saying that each of the candidates go through individually. Still, that's what we do as well.
We bring them through individually still, and it's makes for a really long night, right? And especially when you're doing a Master Mason degree and whatnot. And besides, experience tells me that in each group of 3, there's usually 1 or 2 that falls out of line in between the 2nd and 3rd degree, usually because of a work schedule or something like that. That's 90% of it is work schedule. So much so that we've actually had to have other lodges help us get guys through their degrees when their work schedules interfere, right? But that's on a rare occasion.
Yeah, I think the most on a Master Mason you can really do is 2 in a night to make it experience for them, a quality experience for them, and then also celebrate their. Really, it probably should just be 1 on a night so you can celebrate. In the past, we've gotten a cake or something and have made a real big to do of it, which it is. It is a big to do. Not trying to say it's not, but bringing them through individually. I've seen that, as you mentioned, right, Worshipful Cameron. I've seen that happen where guys, 2, 3, 4 guys are in depth on a Master Mason. I understand it for some of the other concordant groups, and even DMLA. I've seen it done for DMLA and other groups, but it's just not the same experience.
No, it's not. And I wonder what DeWolf Lodge is going to do. I think they have like 20 plus candidates in waiting. They're going to have a lot of degree nights, emergent meetings, right? In order to get them all through in a timely fashion. And it's not like they can, even delay some of them, because a lot of them are so active that they're coming to their current monthly Zoom meetings right now. Very active participants, and to try and get all 20 through in a timely fashion is going to be a real challenge for them. And a lot of the lodges, I'm sure, are experiencing this because, we've had since COVID 4 prospects approach us through various online means just for our lodge. And knowing that there's a few other lodges out there in the same boat. It should be interesting, like you say. I hope everybody practices their ritual, because and you're right, not just the degree ritual. The opening, simple closing of the meeting can totally blow a great night's ritual, right? So
yeah.
Cameron, you talked about education, and having quality education. And I know when I was coming up as master, trying to decide what I wanted to have in my year as education, of course, we all think we work better under pressure and under timing pressure, but we don't. And so I was delayed in getting my list together and thinking, okay, what would be important? And I hate to have those I wish I would have moments where 6 months into your term you go, oh, we could have had that topic, or we could have had that topic. And I still wish I would have done some certain things my year. But when you alluded to just having discussion about our own degrees, and I thought, boy, it's so simple, but it's so profound, and that is so true. So can you talk a little bit more about how a master or officers could really delve into just the first 3 degrees? I know it's going to be different in each jurisdiction, and if Trevor and Steve want to chime in, what their thoughts are too.
Yeah, one thing that I've never forgotten, I was an entered apprentice Mason. I was an EA perhaps a week in, and I went down to a lodge in Bellevue to watch an entered apprentice degree there. After the degree, a couple older gentlemen took me aside. I don't know who they were, unfortunately. They're probably no longer with us. But they took me aside and they explained, how we say that Masonry is veiled in allegory, right? And they said, so when you listen to the ritual and there's things you don't understand, well, that's because it is veiled, right? And you have to look behind that and figure that out. And the example they gave was the way we know a Mason, right? The perfect points of his entrance, the guttural and pectoral and manual and pedal. And they said, one way you could look at that is, well, what you say and what you believe, and what you do, and where you go. And that's all it was, right? Like a 5-minute discussion, but it got me looking at all of our lectures that way and thinking, well, this is a goofy thing to say, but what's maybe behind there? And I think if our lodges can stimulate that kind of thought, I think guys really like that. And if you're the master, it's really easy, right? You pick out a thing, maybe type it into Google and see what some other people say it is. You read it in lodge, and then you just have your one of your deacons carry the microphone around from guy to guy, and you let everybody discuss it round robin style. And you provided an experience there that guys are really going to like. And it was relatively easy to do, right? And importantly, it's completely Freemasonry. Right? It's not like you brought in a chiropractor to talk about, the history of chiropractic. It's actual Masonic education. And so I just think by using our own lectures, we can learn a lot, and we can have a lot of fun too.
I find that interesting because a lot of times you talk to lodge about Masonic education, and they picture somebody, standing up in front of the room and pontificating upon the whatever, the beehive or whatever their topic is, and having, how to phrase this, the times when I have learned a lot about Masonic things are times when someone has said to me, this is what it means to me. This is when I think about the beehive, this is what it means to me. What does it mean to you? And those are the times when I've had to process a bit and think about what they've said and go from there. And that's, I guess it's just the way my brain learns, but it helps to cement a lot of these ideas.
Yeah, and no, I think that's true for most people, that when you think about it, it really sticks in there. My little story, that's how many years ago was that, right? And I still see it plain as day, those elderly gentlemen explaining that to me. And that's the beauty of that round robin discussion system. Now, I will say that in my experience, the first time or two, guys are going to be a little nervous, right? Because some of this stuff, the meanings might be personal to them, and we're not used to talking about those things sometimes as men. But after a couple times, they get into it, and I'm going to say that much like our 6-step program that we thank you for allowing us to steal, I sort of stole this idea from a lodge in Mexico that I was visiting, and that's how they did their Masonic education. And I thought, well, that's cool. So I brought it back with me and became master of my lodge and started doing that. And everybody thought I was a genius. I didn't tell them. I just stole it from this other lodge to our south. But it's just a way that guys can really learn that I think is perhaps more impactful than listening to a lecture.
Yeah, I think you've got two challenges to overcome. One is, as you say, it's a very personal journey for many of us. It's a very personal journey for many of us. So I suspect that, as you say, some of them hesitate to want to talk about it. On the other hand, certainly in our jurisdiction, we have those brethren, those leather lungs, who have an opinion and are going to run away with the conversation. So you need a good moderator. That can also be a problem. Something I tell the brethren, because I've been, of course, responsible for our library and archives for a long time. We, back in 1940, if you have copies of our Grand Lodge proceedings in your library, the 1941 is a big, thick one. And about a third of it was a report from the Education Committee, published articles on and about the symbolism and the meaning and the metaphor and the what have you for all 3 degrees. And I keep reminding brethren, those are there. The language may sound a little odd, being 70, only a full generation away, but still the language has drifted. But the concepts are already there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's not that difficult to find strictly Masonic educational material out there. And of course, the Masonic Service Association of North America has published any number of books, and of course the pamphlets. Yeah, it shouldn't be difficult for a lodge to pull together 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
Well, if
someone with a lecture by someone like me.
If Brother Bailey has a full copy of the 6-step program, it'll also include the mentorship program. And in the mentorship program, there are documents just for this purpose, starting with the ended apprentice, and it goes through their evening and makes a recollection of it. And it's great to take a piece of this and bring it up as part of the education, and then have, like you says, the brethren talk about it. And one of the interesting things that we did a version of that where we would start our education in lodge, and we'd briefly talk about it. We'd have a piece read, and then we'd briefly talk about it. And we would extend the conversation in a more casual format into the festive board and bring it back in line in the festive board, which gave people more of a reason to stick around at the festive board. Because I'll tell you, the stories and education from the personal experiences that the brethren shared was amazing. And it was really something to see how much more they opened up in that format rather than in the lodge.
Excellent.
Yeah, I know Al Jorgensen, most worshipful Al Jorgensen. We've had him on. He's the Sovereign Grand Inspector General for Scottish Rite. He tells a story about a similar experience, Steve, where at Auburn, we used to have a social afterwards. Not wasn't a dinner or anything, but they had spirits and some pie or something afterwards. But it was set up in the way that you had a conversation. There was a topic that they would discuss, and at the time, there was a discussion of whether I think it was during the civil rights era, and there was a discussion that was controversial that was going to be coming up, but he was shipping out to the Air Force, and so the question came up, and he never got the answer, so he shipped away and was excited to hear. But it was that kind of fascination, and it was built in. This is the way we do it, and so they just automatically, everybody left the lodge room and went into the dining hall. It seems like now there's this new tradition where everybody lingers in the lodge room instead of going to the dining. I guess it depends on the culture of the lodge. I think I've said it before. What we did for a couple of years at least was a shrink the lodge concept, where in the middle you'd go to refreshment and everybody come together in the center of the lodge or at the secretary's desk and have that discussion, that education in a more intimate setting. Then you weren't scattered across the room and trying to look at somebody or listen to somebody, and you could look at each other in the eye and have those discussions.
It's interesting, as a junior warden, when you get to invite everybody to the festive board after for refreshment, if you're very clear with them and ask them to, leave the hall or lodge room quickly so our brethren can get it cleaned up and put away, and everybody can join together in a timely fashion on the other side, how quickly they exit. Right, and because they also know that the faster more people get out that room, the bigger the lineup at the bar is going to be.
Yeah, and to get on my own personal soapbox yet again here for a minute, I always I sort of view Masonry as a tree in some ways. I've given this lecture a couple of times at our district training, where the roots of the tree are important things, but they're not the things anyone ever joins for. The Washington Masonic Code, or the Constitution, if you prefer, or the bylaws of your lodge, or whatever, things that you ignore at your peril, but are not why anyone joined Masonry. Everyone joined Masonry for these fruits, right? The wisdom and the charity and the fraternalism, and those things are the fruits of that tree. And the lodge is sort of the base of the tree, and Masonic education is the trunk. That's where all these things are supporting to get to the Masonic education, to get to the personal growth that's up here in the canopy of the tree. And it just bugs me when there's never any Masonic education. Why would you join for those roots? They're important. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't ignore the book. Don't ignore the code. I'm certainly not saying that, but they're not nobody joined for that.
We got to get him to come and give that speech at the next Fruit Growers Association meeting.
I certainly agree with Matthew on that. A question back to Brother Bailey. Well, our American brethren here. Are your lodges dry, or do you have bars in your festive boards?
So
the long pause.
no, I have an odd answer, I guess. So the vast majority of our lodges are not dry. We have a small number of lodges who believe that they are dry. In my opinion, they as well are not dry, because our ritual calls for refreshment, and a lodge can't make rules or bylaws that conflict with our ritual. So technically, I don't believe that any of our lodges are dry, but we do have a small handful that think they're dry.
They're certainly not running a bar after the festive board, though.
No, sir.
I only mention it. British Columbia has a very Puritan backbone. And we had all of our lodges were dry up until, I'm going to say, the late 1960s. And it was quite a discussion point for the decade after. And I don't think we really opened up until the end of the 70s, early 80s. And we do have one or two lodges that are by decision dry. That's their decision.
Yeah, and we were dry as well for in prior times. Our dryness came about as a part of the temperance movement, and when that was discredited in the rest of the United States, apparently the message didn't get to Masonry for quite a few decades after. But I personally find that just sharing a drink and a toast with the brothers after the lodge, that's amazing fellowship. And to skip that and just immediately leave the lodge meeting and run from the building, I mean, when we do that, we're missing out on one of the great, as Matt would say, fruits of masonry, and it's a shame.
Oh, no moral judgment on my part here. I'm more looking at this from a historical perspective. I think there may still be some American jurisdictions where you cannot be in the liquor trade and be initiated into the craft. I don't know if they're still in their constitutions now, but certainly up until fairly recently. So it's just interesting how we've reflected social mores of the greater public.
Yeah.
Indeed. And looks like, judging by the clock on my screen here, we're running to the end of our episode. So, Right Worshipful Sir, I just wanted to give you a opportunity. Is there something else, anything else you'd like to say or exhort us to action upon? Or
Okay, I'll give you one more topic, and that is, as we discussed tonight, we have an awful lot of candidates who have contacted us during COVID. All of our lodges have some, and some of them have a lot. And we can't get so excited that we don't investigate these guys and that we initiate unsuitable men, because one bad man will drive out more than 10 good ones. So let's make sure that we guard the West Gate and we do it well. And with that, I thank you, brothers.
thank you, Right Worshipful
What would
Sir.
it be?
You won't find any argument on that point, I don't think, in this crowd. So,
Yeah.
On that note, thank you for coming on the show again, sir. We appreciate your being here. And on behalf of Trevor and Steve and David and myself, thank you all for listening. And we look forward to hearing from you here on the Working Tools podcast. Goodbye.